Hello, it's Robert here, fact checker and science blogger, and helping people who are scared of many things. And so I'm going to do a shorter version of this video I just uploaded. Let's just put this full screen. So it's to help people who are scared about these stories that are going around claiming that we're going to run out of food and stuff. It's not true at all. There never was any risk of running out of food. So this particular graph is about cereals. And for many people, cereal is the staple to which they add their milk, cheese, meat, vegetables and so on. So to understand this graph, this is the growth in the food that was grown as the years go on, as decades go on, and this is the amount of food that's actually used in each year. And these grey bars show how much food is left at the end of the year before the next harvest. So as you can see, here in 2020 to 2021, we have grown just about the exact amount of food that we are actually going to use. And so as a result of that, we actually grown just a little bit more, and this stock surplus at the end of the year is going to be slightly over. It's going to be a record. The stock surplus is 2,750 million tons. So sorry, no, the combined production is 2,750, and what's the stock surplus? I'm not sure, 800 and something. It's not so far off a billion tons. And 2.75 billion is the amount actually produced. You can read that off that side, and you read the surplus off this side. And the reduction in 2020 wasn't really because of anything to do with COVID-19. It didn't have much impact on the grains. The reason is because much of it is automated, and it didn't really matter the lockdowns. So we're okay for grains. Now if we look at the other food, then so I went into some more details about that in the previous one, so I won't go. I'll just go very quickly about this. Sugar, that's an increase. There was a big increase in India and a slight increase in Brazil, although lower, higher than the EU. Meat is down, and but meat consumption is also down. Meat is down mainly because African swine fever, again nothing to do with COVID-19. And there's a lower demand of meat. That is because of the pandemic, both lower income and people not eating out. It's a similar situation with fish. Catch of wild fish is expected to decline, but then people are eating less wild fish. And fish farming is also also eating less of the farmed fish, and that also, though they reduce the demand, and unfortunately for things like salmon they can't reduce them quickly, but the shrimp and pangasius farmers, they quickly reduced the amount they produced. There's an increase in milk because of favourable monsoons in India. None of this has anything to do with COVID-19. The village cooperatives were very resilient in India. So all that food is fine. But the only one that was really impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic are the tropical fruits. And that is because they're very easily damaged, like pineapples and mangoes, they deteriorate very quickly. So they need to get there quickly. There was a big shortage on air freight because needed for other things, so they couldn't be sent by air easily. There were quarantine problems at the ports, and so there's a lot of wastage. And then the various other issues, increased price of fertilizers, market closures, that's the local markets. I should explain that. Reduced demand because of less eating out. But there was an increased demand because of focus on good nutrition during the lockdown. And it turned out that in particular there was a huge demand of bananas. And the reason was people going out and panic buying, and they want something that lasts for a long time. So they got bananas. And so there was a big increase in bananas. The panic buying was absolutely not needed at all. But it was quite a benefit to bad banana producers that the people in the West panicked over their bananas and bought over their food and bought lots of bananas instead of more perishable food. And there was an increase in avocados. And so generally, the tropical fruits, they weren't too bad either, because in terms of the world production. So I'm not saying everything's rosy. This is a global picture, but there's lots of individual problems there. This just small all these mangoes and papayas is going to be, the local industries are quite a bit impacted by that, because they just weren't able to. I mean, you imagine you're a farm and you produce your mangoes and they go and rot in the port, and because of the quarantine restrictions, and that's most of your crop gone. So there are lots of individual disasters there, but in the world as a whole, then we have weathered this very well, and there's plenty of food. And then so that was my main message here, that there isn't a food problem, and then for 2021 there isn't either. Then if we look at our long-term outlook, then in my longer video I talk about this at great length, but just to quickly summarize, then first of all, they project to 2029 it's going to be an increase, and in everything. It's going to be big increases in Asia and in sub-Saharan Africa. And although it's very small, now one thing I talked about in a bit more length. If you look at China there, China is much smaller than sub-Saharan Africa. Let's look down this map I've got, which shows well, there's a map. So no, that doesn't have it on it. An equal area map down here. I look at this equal area map, and then there you are. That's the area of China, and then look at Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan Africa is much bigger than China. It's only got a tiny, tiny fraction of the output of food. And even allowing for the desert up there, just looking at sub-Saharan Africa and compared with China. So it's pretty obvious. And then the reason is, look at the productivity of Africa. This is just cereals, but it's similar for other things. Then it's well under 2 tons per hectare, compared with, if you look at the United States, it's well over 8, and China is over 6. So you're talking about 3, 4, maybe 5 times increase is possible there. And China is still, and the United States is still increasing. It's not, the United States is not the limit of what we can do. I talk quite a bit about that, but I'll talk a little bit about it here. So this here, sub-Saharan Africa, that should be higher than China. That should go right up there and beyond. And if it was go as good as the United States, it should be way up there. And China as well, of course, would be up there. And this would be even higher, be right up to the top. It would be the biggest producer if it was as efficient as the United States. Now, part of that is just lack of investment. So if you look at there we are. Now, basically, at the less than 2 tons per hectare, in Africa is like 19th century Europe, which, if you think about it, is quite reasonable, because in 19th century Europe there's very little kind of automated agriculture, and people in Europe, they manage their fields much in the way that the poor farmers in Africa manage their fields today. And then we went right up to over 8 tons. And so they're back there really, large parts of Africa. And they've got a huge, huge increase possible. And then, so they could go from there to there, but then we also have the big increase of, the increase from there to there is partly automation, but it's the green revolution, which increased the productivity of crops hugely, with a combination of fertilizers and ways of using it more efficiently and better crop varieties. That hasn't happened in Africa. The special African crops like sorghum and so on, and cassava, they just haven't had that optimization of the crop varieties. It's starting now, but they're basically back here, just starting on their optimization. And then the education of the farmers and the introduction of new ways of doing things, improvements in irrigation and so on, all that is still to happen in Africa. So the world situation is going to, we see there's going to be a big increase in Africa even in 2029, but there's going to be a huge, huge increase if you go through to 2100. Now, so I talked about that, and I talked quite a bit about that, and then this is I've just had it since then. This news about famine projection for 27 countries. There's a projection of between 101 and 104.6 million in 2020, and like 7.6 million in 2019. So just a few percent more. And these same countries are the ones that were projected for famine in 2019, and it didn't happen. And now if we look at this, then what I want you to look at just now is look at the reason for the famines. It's not going to be a shortage of food, because the world produces plenty of food. We don't get famines because of a lack of food in the world as a whole. While there's a famine in Yemen, say, then China and the United States have huge, huge stocks of grains. The farmers are holding on to the grain because they want to sell them when the price is right, and then the countries have their stockpiles, which they keep for a bad day. So the problem is just that the grain surpluses are there and there in other parts of the world, and then you've got grain shortage here. Now, in most of these countries, it's not even a shortage of food in the country itself. It's just the ones with this little symbol. See, food is the problem. So food, food, food. So Ethiopia and Somalia is food. And see, the Yemen is not food at all. And Nigeria is not food. Democratic Republic of Congo it is. And I think those are the only ones that it's food for. The Sudan and the Central Sahel. Then those are food. That's down here. So, but it's only local food because the world is a food. The world is plenty. So those are the crises. And then, for instance, the Yemen is particularly hard hit because of the conflict, which is partly fueled by support from Saudi Arabia, and then international organisations have withdrawn some of their aid to the Yemen. So that is a problem there. So then I just want to talk a bit about, like I talked about, so there's no possibility of human extinction. Absolutely no possibility. How could it go extinct in the world with ice covering Greenland? Oh, I seem to have lost my map of Greenland. I'll add that back in. So I'll just show you it. There we are, that should be in there. I'll put it back in. So you get the Extinction Rebellion go around schools, they tell children, you're not going to grow up, we're going to go extinct sometime in the 2020s, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's for us adults to do it, and we're not doing anything. And they scare the wits out of these children who can't do anything about it, because they're children, and there's not very much they feel that they can do about it. And you get these Extinction Rebellion activists going around the schools telling kids that they're basically all going to die. It's utter nonsense, and absolutely appalling. And the climate scientists, the good ones, are absolutely appalled by this. And So if someone comes to your school and tells you you're going to go extinct, now you might feel a bit shy about answering back, but for your own peace of mind, just flash your mind on this and ask yourself, how is this a world? So that's the projection for even for business as usual. We're not on that. We are somewhere, we are likely to be able to achieve this, in my view. We're headed for 2.25 degrees C. Ask yourself, how is that a world that is too hot for humans? And I think these people have a compartmentalized mind. I've come across it myself, because in a couple of decades ago, I was very keen on humans to Mars, and then I also knew that the spacecraft that are sent to Mars are sterilized to protect native life. And I never saw the dichotomy between those. And I think many people keen on humans to Mars, even today, don't quite spot that. But it's very important to protect Mars. If you're interested in native life on Mars, as I was, and many people are, then what, and you agree, and if you agree that we should sterilize our spacecraft, as most people would agree, then how are humans going to get to Mars and not contaminate the native life before we've even had a chance to study it? So that was a thing that I had in my mind. So just a couple of decades ago, I just never saw that. And then eventually I saw it, and I read up all about planet protection literature, and I thought, sure, they've got an answer to that, and it turned out they hadn't. So it's rather like that with this, with the saying that humans are extinct, going to go extinct, and it turns out that there's absolutely no way. It doesn't make sense. It literally doesn't make sense. I think they've got compartmentalized minds, like I did a couple of decades ago on planetary protection. They just haven't put those two things together. Oh, you do see, right. Yeah, so I'll pop that there. No possibility of human extinction. So now, yes, I was explaining, there's this map there, and so many areas of the world now have 2 crops a year, where they used to have 1 crop a year. And if you look at, say, India or China, northern India and China is particularly, and so in northern India, what it used to be is that the rice would take the entire wet season, and then you had the dry season. They just left the land fallow. Now they have a much faster growing rice, which means you crop long before the end of the wet season. You then plant a second crop of chickpeas or whatever, and then that can then grow. That's a suitable crop to grow during the dry season, apparently, using the moisture in the soil. And then I think they use drip irrigation as well, but they managed to get 2 crops in place of 1. So only 5% of the rain-fed agriculture, like we've got here in the United Kingdom, is as this, but 40% of the irrigated land is now under double cropping. That can be expanded, and it will be expanded. The projection is for double cropping to expand. There we are. The growth in multi-cropped land, multi-cropped. See this faint area. These are growths in multi-cropped land, and this is just the growth of the previous year. This is the actual in northeast, and this is an actual reduction in the land in growth in land use. Actually, land use returning to other things. So you get that in the next decade. In some areas, and a high increase in the yields, because we are learning to have much better crop varieties. And you're talking about 10-20% increases due to yields. That's a lot. So the projections are good for the next decade. And this looks at the crop yield increases. Look, are they going up, 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 up? So, and that's with the global warming, then the CO2 fertilization helps, and then the other things don't help. So the main the warming helps and a longer growing season, but then it gets a little bit too warm for rice in the hottest places, and so they're developing new varieties of rice that are able to withstand the warmer temperatures. And so it's a bit of a race between the warming of the temperature, and they manage to improve the rice enough to be warm enough to withstand warm enough temperatures. So now, I just talked briefly about the famine. I talked about that just now, didn't I? Did I? Oh, I'm confused about which. I talked about that. I don't think I did. No, that's the previous one. So the famine projections, and then most of them are not about food. They're about the insecurity of the and military conflict and things like that. So we have plenty of food in the world. No possible human extinction. Yes. So I'm going to end this quickly. I want this to be much shorter because I know for a lot of people now it's too long. So I'm just going to talk very briefly. 2 crops a year is not the limit. So I talked very briefly about space colonies. So people are very enthusiastic on humans to Mars, or humans to the moon. Then they've worked out these ways of doing super efficient agriculture, because you can't plant a seed on the lunar soil. Turns out it's the same for Mars. You can't. It's just totally impossible conditions for crops. And the atmosphere is so thin, even on Mars, that it's essentially a vacuum. You can't grow crops. You pour water on the soil, it just evaporate. And the crops wouldn't just can't cope with those conditions. And at night it's as cold as dry ice. Absolutely impossible. So they have these greenhouses. You would have to have a greenhouse, but a normal greenhouse on Earth, if you just could teleport, like a Star Trek transporter, you teleport a greenhouse from Earth with all the air inside onto the moon or onto Mars, it would explode instantly because of the pressure of the air inside, which presses out at 10 tons per square meter. So it's a case of having to deal with a very limited area for a space colony, because it has to be a very, very robust construction in order to hold out, even if it's transparent, be some very, very strong transparent material in a dome shape, not shaped like a greenhouse. And so the area of crops would be very, very limited in a space colony. And that's why they had to develop super efficient agriculture, and they worked out a way to do 12 crops a year with very fast growing dwarf wheat and things like radishes and beets and things that you can grow very quickly. And so with 12 crops a year, naturally you can grow much more. Not just twice what we've got now, but more than 10 times conventional agriculture. And this, of course, is not restricted to a space colony. If you did your space colony on Earth, the same people, you would have far, far, far less equipment. You don't need to have a spacesuit. A spacesuit is as complex as a small plane or a racing car. Very, very difficult. These are bound to be expensive. And then, but even worse, the dust on Mars and Moon would wear away at your spacesuit. You'd have to replace it in a fortnight or so. So the idea of, there's no way, you get these people saying we need to put not of all our eggs in one basket. Elon Musk talks about how saying we've got to go to Mars, set up a colony on Mars so that we have a second planet. We don't need that. It makes no sense to go into space for agriculture. Absolutely no sense. Lots of other reasons to go into space, for instance for mining, and the moon is much better than Mars because export is much easier to Earth. So there's big deposits of platinum possibly on the moon. There's some evidence that suggests it, magnetic evidence, and various other things that are worth going to the moon for. But and then of course the hotel and I talked about the possibility of Space Olympics being able to fly and run on water, fly just with wings attached to your arms and so on. I think the moon will be a very popular destination, but and I think there will be permanent colonies on the moon, but not for the agriculture, not until you've got these big city domes and caves completely filled. If there are vast lunar caves on the moon, then and they kind of fill them with air and then block them off, then people could live inside those caves, and then what inside a huge cave, it'd be rather similar to living on Earth. But a small colony of little houses on the surface of the moon, it's far, far, far more difficult to do agriculture than on Earth. And so if you use the space agriculture that they've developed for the space colonies, and so I talked about how this is like a space colony, but much, 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 much easier, using salt water and from the sea, which goes through your greenhouse. It goes through a kind of percolator here, and then a hot, dry, dusty breeze turns to a fresh, humid breeze inside your greenhouse, and then it goes out to the other side. It condenses and it goes. The deep sea water is used to condense it with cold pipes, so you get fresh water coming out. So you refill your aquifers, or you use your fresh water for any purpose, and the moist air comes out the other side of the building, so the greenhouse actually grows green. This is much, much lower tech than a space colony, and there's no reason why you can't do these 12 crops a year with a system like this, if you wanted to. They don't know if they actually do, but you could do, if you use the same methods as for a space colony. So we could feed everyone from just a small area of the Sahara Desert. 2.5% would be enough to feed everyone if we use these super efficient methods. So please don't think that we will ever run out of food. The question really is, how quickly can we move to being how sustainable? And we've got a huge improvement just with ordinary agriculture without going this far. I also talked about how we can use the sea and sea steading. That's another way we could expand. You know, a tiny area of the sea again would feed everyone. And then we've got these giant kelp. But I'm going to stop soon, so I'm not going to detail about that now. And so what else was I going to talk about? Yes, then reversing desertification, obvious thing, and how the warmer world is, people get this idea for some reason that the warmer world is a desert. It's just not true at all. A warmer world has moisture air. Now, it's climate change, so you do get parts of it go desert, and that's probably where this came from. So for instance, parts of Australia go desert, could dry out, definitely. And areas around the Mediterranean dry out. But then large areas, for instance, if you look at the tropical rainforest, most of the tropical rainforest stays as it is. In Africa, it actually expands. But in South America, it shifts in a warmer world. So it doesn't actually get less in area. In fact, I think the total tropical rainforest area projected, if you look at not just what, I mean the area suitable for tropical rainforest, and which could be tropical rainforest if you wanted it to be. And so that's just the way of it. You do get more dry areas, but you get an awful lot of water in concentrated in shorter periods, which is a bit of a problem, for instance, in some of the climates in the future. That is concentrated in winter, then it dries out more in summer. So that's an issue for some of the tropical areas. But so you have these issues, but it's not a world that is desert. It's not a desert. No matter how warm it gets, it won't be a desert. It'll be a world with deserts, but it won't be a desert world. And we're not leading to a mass extinction. We're the humans, the many creatures are actually benefiting from this. It's more that some creatures are going extinct, especially ones that are small numbers already. But you're not talking about an end of a world without forests or a world without whales are increasing actually. Anyway, so I don't want to go on and on about that. I've got to stop soon. And so what else? Oh yes, so there's just all the things you can do. You can go click through. I could talk about those separately. I think I talked about those in the longer video, but I won't in this. You can just have a look through. But that's about how Brazil is transitioning to a more sustainable agriculture, and we will see this in I talked about how Europe is basically has already had its deforestation, and we are now reforesting, and most of the world is reforesting, but the Sub-Saharan Africa is still deforesting, and South America is deforesting significantly, but this can turn around. And just in the case of Europe, we deforested most of our land thousands of years ago, and we're now reforesting. It's very important to support Brazil and not to kind of blame them for it, but to say, this is what we did, and see that you're now going through what we did 1,000 years ago, and what the United States went through a few centuries ago, and try to support them to go beyond that, and to become, they can double the efficiency of their agriculture. Lots of NGOs working in Brazil, and international organisations working on ways of helping to transition to the more intensive, more sustainable agriculture, where they could produce the same amount of meat and the same amount of crops from half the land area if they were as efficient as the United States. And that obviously would just eliminate all the pressure on the forests in Brazil. If Brazil could be assisted to reach the same level of agriculture as the United States has. Particularly, very simple thing, but farmers in Brazil can't afford to reseed their grassland. And that is why, that's the main reason, that they have only one cow, where in the United States they would have more than two cows in the same area of land. And the seeding pays itself back, but they just don't have the capital to do it. So the farmers themselves know that if they were to reseed their grassland, they'd be able to have more cows. They just don't have the capital to do it. So that's just one example. So this is all these things, and yes, I added my 12 simple lifetime changes to help reduce global warming and biodiversity loss. I will end there. So yeah, I said I wouldn't do half an hour. I don't want this to be another 1 hour. That would be pointless. So this is my shorter version. I will now upload it. And just a shout out to Doomsday Debunk. Be sure to read the rules at the head of the group when you join, if you join it, to either help or if you're scared.